to another Building Bridges show, and this week we have a very special guest, someone we've had on one of our Building Bridges television shows before, and he's a very exciting guest, and he is a very good conversationalist, and this both Jaylan and I enjoy very much. How are you today, Jaylan?
Oh, I'm looking at a beautiful view of Bosphorus, and the weather is lovely here, so I'm feeling great. How are you?
Well, you're about 4,000 miles away from here, and you're seeing something totally different than I am, because right now it's pitch black here, and it's a muggy New England summer evening.
Okay.
But anyway, of course, for everybody in our audience, that was Jaylan Uzbadak. She is, in fact, the executive director of the Building Bridges Project in WTPN. But let me give you some information on our guest tonight, because he is a favorite of ours and, again, a great conversationalist. In 1999, at the age of 24, Mr. Joseph Grieboski founded the Institute on Religion and Public Policy. 13 years and several Nobel Peace Prize nominations later, Joseph became an internationally renowned expert in security, counterterrorism, human rights, conflict transformation, business development, and much more. As a matter of fact, in a letter to Joe in 2005, His Majesty King Mohammed of Morocco referred to Joe's work as the foundation of a new civilization. Now, there's some big praise for you. As a religious freedom and human rights, national security, and international policy expert, Joe has testified before the United States Congress, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the United Nations Human Rights Council, the European Parliament, and countless other legislative and international bodies. That's a mouthful, Joseph. So I don't know how I could possibly beat that, but I'm going to turn the first question over to Jaylan, because it's
okay.
Always ladies go first. And
how nice.
Would you please ask our special guest here the first question?
Joseph, you have been nominated for several Nobel Peace Prizes, and this is very admirable. For everyone listening right now, can you please explain to our audience what these nominations were for?
Sure, of course, Sean. Thank you, and Roger, it's a pleasure to be on again. Our work has been in the human rights field, and particularly the religious freedom field. But what we've tried to do is make religious freedom more than just a church-state, mosque-state, synagogue-state issue. That for us, we see that freedom of religion is an interfaith dialogue issue, it's a national security question, it's an academia issue, it's a media issue. And so what we've tried to do is build partnerships and relationships and networks across the world, across fields, across areas. And our work was recognized particularly through the work of our Interparliamentary Conference. We launched the world's first parliamentary network that focused solely on freedom of religion and human rights. And that network helped to build relationships between countries that didn't exist before. And so our work was recognized with the nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize in trying to build those relationships across religions and across countries.
Excellent. All right. Well, then here's a follow-up for that, because this will lead, you just led right into the next question, okay? You were very active in religious endeavors at a very young age, and even at 24 years old, you founded the Institute on Religion and Public Policy. Now, for most 24-year-olds, you're just getting out of college, you're just stretching out, but to sit down and found an institute with far-reaching goals like that, please explain what its mission is, what its goals are, and what drove you at that early point in your life to come up with an organization with such far-reaching goals?
Well, Roger, it's funny. I laughed that I got fired from my last job and nobody else would hire me, so I went ahead and founded this new organization.
Okay.
But, the reality is that in 1999, freedom of religion was not a well-known issue. It was not a well-known topic. Even though the United States Congress the year before had unanimously passed the International Religious Freedom Act, people weren't really concerned with the issue. They didn't know much about it. And those who did know and those who were active saw freedom of religion as an individual case issue. To me, individual cases were quixotic. We could help pastors, we could help imams, we could help rabbis, but unless we were solving the systemic problems which caused those individual cases to happen, we would be forever chasing after those individual cases.
Yes.
And the other side of it is that I saw religion as, well, how do I want to put this? I saw religion as something that was a rising issue in the global sphere, as something that people needed to be aware of, as something that was going to have a much larger impact. And I wanted to try and make sure that our policymakers were aware of and attuned to the fact that these issues were things that they needed to be paying attention to. And to be perfectly clear, I wasn't trying to make sure that religion was suddenly involved in government, just the opposite. I wanted government to be aware of the fact that religion existed and was something that they needed to be paying attention to.
Very nice.
Yes.
I know you have something to say about that, Ceylan. I know you do.
That's very true, because abruptly we have been doing almost the same thing here on this side of the pond for like 25 years, because people don't realize, especially in the Western world, especially in North America, that the role of the spiritual leaders, for example, is crucial in the region, in Middle East especially. Because unlike other parts of the world, classical politics play a minor role here, and this is a conservative region. And the secular bias of the parts of the Western world is not helping solve the problems over here. And the so-called golden rule of some of the American politics, which is if you want to discuss politics, you cannot discuss religion, would not work here. It would not, period. So take Turkey, for example. It's a strictly secular country. However, the traditions and the religion is in the soul, in every move of the people living here. So religion is a major part of the people's life. And many politicians, prime ministers, presidents are trained by Islamic congregations. And how can you deny the existence of religion in people's life in such a case? So I think in order for a Western politician to understand Middle East or understand parts of the Europe, they have to understand the religion. It doesn't mean they have to be religious, but they have to understand religion.
And Ceylan, that's the very key point that we were trying to get at. I said this when I was on the television show with you guys earlier. On September 10th, 2001, I couldn't find a scholar of Islam if my life depended on it. On September 12th, I couldn't swing a cat without hitting 100 of them. And all of a sudden, there was this belief that, we know everything about Islam. But the fact is that if we understood Islam, we would have understood that 9/11 was coming. We would have understood what the Taliban was. We would have understood what Al-Qaeda was. We would have been able to be prepared for the developments that were occurring in that part of the world and that we see developing in other parts of the world. And I do need to say something, just to be clear. This is not a problem just in Islam. This is a problem in Christianity. This is a problem in Judaism. This is a problem in Buddhism. That we see a rising extremism in every religious context in the world today. And unless our policymakers are aware of what that means and what that can become, we will find ourselves in a much more dangerous and much more consequently restrictive life in the United States and around the world than we have ever seen in our history.
Well, I got to pick up on that, because I would honestly, I know you see this as well as I do, but we are at a point in the United States right now where we are willingly, at least a vast majority of the population in this country, are willingly giving up rights in order to assume that they're going to be safer. We have this in the TSA across the country. We have checkpoints on our highways now. We have checkpoints in our bus stations. We have what most people would consider a gross violation of their rights going on in airports. This is something that is happening across the United States. And a lot of it is due to the sensationalism that the mainstream media gives the fear of Islam. And the fear of Islam in this country is being fed by the mainstream media because 90% of what we see is negative. But what we have here is it is a restrictive proposition for diplomats to really get out from country to country and make any sweeping changes. They're bound by treaties. They're bound by regional wars. They're bound by the ebb and flow of politics in the world. So they're very limited in the scope of changes they can make, especially with any immediacy. What we have here is a project like building bridges, whereby we are seeing, and I can give you examples, and Jaylon can as well, we are seeing changes in the groups that we present our Muslim brothers and sisters to. Over a 6-month period, the tolerance by tens of thousands of people in WTPN alone has shifted from immediate pushback anytime we discuss Islam to 95% positive comments on anything we put down. Of course, you're always going to have naysayers. But let's harken back to one post, and I like to talk about this, and you'll probably get a giggle out of Jaylon for this. I put a post in Facebook about the actual, the true definition of jihad. I put, and what the post stated was what the mainstream media's definition of jihad was, which terrifies every American, and what the actual Quran's description of jihad was. That got about a 98% approval rating from everybody, and WTPN has well over 20 million voices in it. We had less than 0.1% pushback on that post, and what's even more amazing is just 6 months after we started the Building Bridges project, it got shared 2,000 times in the first 24 hours, and these are all American groups and forums that shared it. So what I'm seeing is that it is the grassroots level projects like building bridges, the interfaith programs that are going on around the world by the Catholic Church, by we had a Jewish rabbi on, well, Jewish and rabbi is a little redundant, but we had a rabbi on the other on our last show who again has another project, something like this, and what we're seeing is at the grassroots level, people are eager to reach out and talk and learn. And once you've dispelled the ignorance, then all of a sudden you find respect is burgeoning all over the place. And that's what Building Bridges does. We dispel ignorance. We don't force religion on anybody. As a matter of fact, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Christian, and I'm not Islamic. I consider myself to be a very spiritual person, but I claim no church. So what I'm seeing is at the grassroots level, there is an eagerness to engage in these type of conversations, to engage in these type of projects. What do you see as the future for projects like Building Bridges and interfaith organizations? And again, it's not just about religion, it's also about cultures. What do you see as far as the grassroots level? How important is that? Is it as important as I can see it is?
Actually, Roger, I disagree with you. It's more important than I think you see.
I love it when you disagree with me that way.
I think the reality is that we look at the political situation in the United States today, and this so bear with me on this. This may seem like it's coming out of the blue, but bear with me on this. Okay. We look at the political situation in the United States today, and people have a real problem with the Tea Party. And I'm one of those people, by the way, who has a real problem with the Tea Party. But what the Tea Party has taught us is something that I have argued for a very long time, that if the individual citizen, and it doesn't matter what the country is, but if the individual citizen does not take ownership of their rights and their responsibilities. And I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I'm tired of hearing people talk about rights without talking about responsibilities.
Yes.
And I actually think
Yeah.
we need to redefine the entire concept of human rights, because the concept of human rights has been hijacked by this belief that everything we want is a right rather than everything we are. But what the Tea Party has taught us is that the individual needs to take responsibility for their government, for their rights, for their duties, for their responsibilities. And while the Tea Party may have gone off the reservation, the very start of what they argued has resonance.
Yes.
And I believe that this is something that we need to understand, and it's in the grassroots level that we will see this change. And I think it's important in that in an interfaith level, in an intercultural level, in an interpolitical level, in a sociological level, in a psychological level, that people understand who and what they are, what they need to be doing, what their responsibilities are, and not rely on the mainstream media, which you touched on before. And by the way, your introduction and how you started this conversation gave me 6,000 things to talk about. So I'm going to try and be good about this. I'm going to try and be good about this.
The reason you're on this show, the reason you were invited, is because you put ideas forward very well, and we're eager to listen.
Well, I appreciate that, but I have to go off on another tangent now, which is the mainstream media problem in Islam. Islam has a real problem in America. I'm just going to come out and say it. Islam has a problem in America because Americans are ignorant, and I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. I mean that in the general sense that we just don't know. And the problem is that Americans don't want to know. And I'll tell you a story. I work with a very prominent Islamic organization who has a senior staff person whose first name is Jihad. And this individual was going through the airport one day and got pulled aside and went through a giant, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, there was pat-downs, and he was there for 4 hours, and it was a horrible situation, all because his name was Jihad. Because everybody believes in the United States, because the mainstream media and the Christian right have argued that jihad means war.
Yes.
And part of the problem is, while groups like Building Bridges and other organizations have tried to define the real meaning of jihad, there has not been a grassroots or strategic communications I don't want to say plan, but a strategic communications emphasis in the United States to teach people on what jihad really means.
Agreed.
Yes,
and this is where what you guys are doing is fundamentally important, because you're able to teach people on a grassroots, person-by-person level. But we also have to look at it in a strategic sense, which is to say, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Islamic Society of North America, some of the major Islamic organizations become sidelined and humiliated, frankly, in the mainstream media and elsewhere by the ignorance and I'm sorry, stupidity of some people in the Christian right. And I think about the Michelle Bachmann letters from June, where they sent letters to the U.S. government inspectors general based on nothing but Islamophobia and xenophobia, painting Islam and Islamic organizations in this horrible and pejorative way. But I didn't hear a response from the Islamic organizations.
I mean, Joseph, right now, also in the Islamic world, also between Muslims, people are confused about things. When I said the region is conservative a few minutes ago, this should be also considered that conservatism can go both ways. And a person can preserve the moral values of a tradition and be a traditional conservative, or a person can decide to preserve the moral values of a religion and be a religious conservative. And for example, a traditional conservative can preserve the moral values of the Bedouin culture before Islam. They can decide to preserve the moral values of Lenin, for example, and they will still be called a conservative person. And people are in confusion right now here because religion is not a problem, but it's also not the part of the problem. But people who claim to be practicing religion, but going into other directions, such as traditions, is the problem most of the times. Also in the region and in the United States. I've been there and I saw it before. You're right. So what is needed to be done, just like you said, is to give religious education to people who seek for it. Or else we will be leaving it to the bigots. And if we let bigots take the stage, we cannot complain anymore. I mean, we do not have to have the right to complain because, you know, think of a young person, and that person is trying to learn what Islam is, and if he cannot find anyone who can teach him the true Islamic core moral values, he will be a bigot because whether or not some of my Muslim friends will like it or not, I mean, bigots are in majority right now in the Muslim world. For example, when I'm a very religious person, I'm a very religious Muslim, and when people in America saw my image, they told me, "You're not Muslim.
Yes.
You cannot be a real Muslim. I don't believe you ever read Quran once."
Well, you didn't have a burqa and you didn't have a veil and other things.
Yeah,
and you know, Jalen, what you said was it hit home to me because I had this conversation actually about you last week in my office because you had posted a photo on Facebook, and I mentioned that we'd been trying to schedule this conversation, and an intern in my office looked at that photo and said, "Well, she can't possibly be a Muslim."
Yes.
And I said, why? And this entire And this is the thing. It's not bigoted necessarily. It's
ignorant.
It's ignorant.
Yes. It's ignorant.
This ignorant Orientalist worldview that we take that says anybody who's a Muslim has to be they have to be Arab and they have to wear a hijab.
Yeah.
And then they're Muslim. Oh, and by the way, they want to blow us up. So that is the only thing that defines a Muslim.
And
so
you're classifying people.
Exactly. And, you know, psychologically, that's what we as people do. We categorize, and it makes it easier for us to deal with it. But in a certain sense, that's one of the wonderful things that I appreciate so much about building bridges and about, Jaylon, what you're doing, and Roger, what you're doing, is in a very, straightforward sense, you're saying, look, I don't fit into your category. This is who and what I am. And I believe this, and you have to accept that I can be both. And that's really, in a certain sense, Roger, you asked me at the beginning of this what the mission of the Institute was. In a certain way, that's what our mission is. Our mission is to say, I don't have to necessarily accept what you believe, but I have to respect who you are and that you have the right to believe it. And I take it one step further, which is I will not only accept your right and respect your right, I will protect your right. And that's what I really believe we are all called to do in both a religious sense, a moral sense, a political sense, and a legal sense. That we are all called, regardless of whether we agree or not, to respect the rights of the other.
I need to shift this just a little bit into another area that is of grave concern to a huge portion of the United States and indeed the NATO world in total, and that is the Middle East, okay? What we see is a vast amount of turmoil in the Middle East, and just bear with me for a second. We know there's turmoil in Iraq. We know there's turmoil in Afghanistan. We know there's turmoil in Syria. There's turmoil in Lebanon. There's turmoil in Israel with the Palestinians. And what we see in the entire region is there is one almost totally, probably 98% Islamic country that has a huge amount of stability. So that would be Turkey. Now, what I see is Turkey being in a position to play a huge leadership role. And I'm not talking about a political role. I'm not talking about something whereby they will enforce their beliefs or their structure on any other state, but as a big brother, as setting an example. I see Turkey as playing a huge role in the Middle East just due to the example they set. I want your opinion on that because I know Ceylan's going to want to say something when you're done.
Ceylan, did you want to say anything before I started?
No, of course not.
Okay. Well, then let me say this. I think that the future of Europe is in Turkey.
Yes.
In many ways. I also think the future of the Middle East is in Turkey. I think right now, as we look at what's happening in Syria, as we look at the developments in Iran, as we look at Russia's waning influence in many ways, the regional power is moving very much toward Istanbul and toward Ankara. I think that Turkey has a capacity to be a balancing and moderating role in the Islamic world, in the Middle East, and in the eastern part of Europe, the southeastern part of Europe. But I also think that Turkey has some of its own issues that it needs to address, and that it's only just beginning to recognize that those issues exist. And I've been pleasantly surprised by how the current government has dealt with those issues. That there has been movement forward. Their openness toward dealing with issues like the Halki Seminary, their willingness to deal with things like the Fenar and the Patriarchate in Istanbul. There has been a much different relationship with the non-Muslim world out of Turkey than we'd seen historically. So religiously, politically, militarily, internationally, and in a certain sense, while and I'm going to bring up a very controversial topic, while the Aid flotilla caused a problem between the relationship of Turkey and Israel, I actually think I still think the relationship between Israel and Turkey is the strongest relationship that we see between the Jewish state and any Muslim country.
Yes,
of course.
And I actually think that is going to become the model for how countries like Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, maybe not Egypt, but other predominantly Muslim and importantly predominantly Muslim countries deal with the state of Israel. And I think it's going to be a great model in that sense. And I think Turkey has a great capacity and a great opportunity. It just needs to, how do I want to put this? I think Turkey just needs to be more aware of the fact that they're important, because I think there's a certain lack of understanding within Turkey of just how important it is and the role that it plays.
You're right. I mean, I'm originally Greek, so sometimes people ask me why I don't say Greece has to be a leader in the region, because Greece cannot. We all know they don't have it in them. And when we look at the region, there is no other country rising up as a brotherhood, as a brother, just like Roger said. And they do not want to be the leaders. I mean, they're not even interested in being the leaders. And just like you said, Turkey has a slightly different culture and a slightly different role in the region right now. For example, after the flotilla incident, I keep saying this over and over again because I think it's very significant in terms of understanding what Turkish government thinks of Israel. People were really tense at the time. But then, like after the flotilla incident, I think 3 or 4 days later, a fire broke out in the mountains of Israel, and Turkey was the first country to send the planes to extinguish the fire. And people in the Western media were shocked to see Prime Minister Erdogan send his planes to extinguish the fire, even without asking them if they needed help. And he said, "Of course I will extinguish the fire. Of course, I will help. I love my Jewish brothers and sisters. It doesn't matter if we have a problem with the current government. I will always be there to protect the Jewish people because I'm a Muslim and Jewish people are entrusted to me. People of the book are entrusted to me. And even though Turkey is a democracy and Turkey has a secular kind of government, there's a strict secular system in Turkey, Turkish people are sincere Muslims in general. There are thousands of Jews living here. There are thousands of, Christians and atheists living here and pagans living here. But the majority is Muslims. So, and they are not bigots. They are living Islam in a core kind of way in general. So they look at Israel as a people, as the people of the book. They look at Jewish people as their brothers and sisters and people they have to protect, people they have to help, people they have to be compassionate about. So they will always be there to protect them. And if you look at also the missile shield, it's only there to protect Israel. And we all know when there's a missile shield to protect Israel, if there's any country in the region whoever wants to attack Israel will first attack that missile shield. So the first attack will be in Turkey. But it doesn't matter for Turkish people, and nobody raised their voice in Turkey when it was set up. They all said, of course we will have it here, of course we will protect Israel. And there's another reason people do this, because Turkey and Israel are two countries in the region who are not ruled by Marxist regime. Because when we look at, for example, Iran, even though we see an Islamic rule there in name, there is a Marxist regime behind the scenes. Yeah. When we look at the North African Arab countries, there has been a Marxist regime for like 6 or 5 decades in the region after the Baath Party, with the influence of the Baath Party. And we look at Russia, it's the same. We look at Asia, it's the same. So Turkey and Israel will cooperate with each other even more from now on, because they are the two countries which are not Marxist in the region.
Right. And Jalen, you touched on something very, very important, which is that the difference in how Turkey and Israel fits within the regional reality. The other thing that I just wanted to point out is, where Turkey plays such an influential role in things like the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, by not being an Arab country, not being a Persian country, Turkey plays a very separate role and a very important role in the Islamic world by being ethnically different but religiously the same, quote unquote, religiously the same.
Yes.
It's able to have a very moderating role and also a very inspirational role to say, look, no, we're not Persian, no, we're not Arab, but we are all Muslim. The Ottoman concept of our spreading of Islam is where our history comes from, but look where we are today. Look at the democracy that we've become. And I think in a certain sense, Turkey is going through a transition now, moving more toward that. We are a secular system, but a religious nation in a way that the United States is also doing. And I think it's very interesting to watch that process. And I think one of the things that I hope is in Turkey's future is a recognition that you can have a system which is not religious and still respect and protect the rights of the nation which is religious.
Actually, Joseph, when you look at Turkey and the secular system, it's even more secular than America is right now. For example, in America, you can go to a university wearing a veil or wearing a hijab, for example. But in Turkey, you cannot. And you cannot, for example, go into any governmental building wearing a veil or hijab or covering your head or carrying any religious sign on you. So Turkey is in system is much more secular than Europe is, and is much more secular than America is. But for example, we have a right-wing government. and our right-wing government gives examples of Islam. For example, they talk about Islam. Our prime minister talks about verses in the Quran. And when you see him in the media, a person who doesn't even know Turkey, or who hasn't visited Turkey, or who has never seen a picture of people living in Turkey, for example, they might think that, okay, there must be an Islamic rule in Turkey. No, there is not. For example, I used to be an atheist until the age of 23, and I never felt I was oppressed by Muslim people. And then I chose to be a Muslim, and I never felt oppressed by atheists or Jewish people or Christian people. People do not care in a positive way, I'm speaking. People do not care what each other believes here, because Turkey is a melting pot of cultures, and especially Istanbul. You know, we have a 5,000 years of history here, and it was the heart of Ottoman Empire, Byzantine Empire, Roman Empire. It was the heart of Christianity. It was the heart of Islam once, and people got used to living with each other here. That's what you also say, I think, because here, for example, you cannot find anyone who's 100% genetically Turk. Everyone's from somewhere else. You know,
a melting pot.
Yeah. I think it's also working in a positive way for us.
I would tend to agree, and again, I'm going to because we're probably down to the last 15 minutes here, so I'm going to shift the direction just a little bit. We have discussed religion, we have discussed religious tolerance, we have discussed how religions are portrayed, how they're displayed. We've discussed ignorance. We've discussed all of these things having to do with religion. And this is a very important topic, especially, as Ceylan has pointed out, especially in the Middle East, where religion plays such a major role, even in the governments of any state in that area. But I want to roll just a little bit further and just a little bit away from religion, and I want to move towards human rights. I want to ask you, Joseph, what role do you believe organizations such as WTPN and Building Bridges, because, again, WTPN is basically an American political organization whereby Building Bridges is our cultural outreach, and through cultures we have to include the religions of the world. So WTPN and Building Bridges, although of the same organization, have two basically different missions. WTPN being the the correcting of political mistakes by what the majority of people in this country believe are being made. Building Bridges is about bringing people together in the world, cultures and religions, through a grassroots level. But how do you feel WTPN and Building Bridges can play a role in bringing light to bear on human rights violations across the globe, and how effective do you think the grassroots organizations like this can be? Because we can talk about religion all day long, but even if we exclude religion from the conversation, there are human rights violations taking place across the world that are going ignored by NATO, ignored by the United Nations, ignored by America. How do you feel that these grassroots programs such as WTPN and Building Bridges can have a major effect on bearing light on this? People need to see these things, Joseph.
One of the best things that you can do is keep making people aware. I say this again, not in the pejorative sense, but in the simple reality sense. I never cease to be shocked and appalled by the ignorance of the American people on what happens to their co-religionists.
Agreed.
Overseas, let alone what happens to people of other faiths, other ethnicities, other sexual identities, and so forth. The more we can do to make people aware of the fact that these things happen, the more I hope, and this is really very much a hope, because I'm really not sure that I have the evidence yet, but it is a hope that people will take notice. And let me tell you a story. Let me put this anecdotally. Roger, you asked me at the beginning of the conversation, how did I get into this?
Yep.
many moons ago, I was hired to be the religious liberty director of an organization that no longer exists. And I have to be honest and tell you, at that time, I knew nothing about religious freedom. I mean, honestly, I believed everybody had the First Amendment. I was completely clueless. I was like everybody else. I knew nothing about religious persecution. I knew nothing about religious discrimination. So I was pretty shocked why I got hired to do this job. On my first day in the office, I'm sitting there literally twiddling my thumbs trying to figure out what to do when, by providence, I'm visited by a woman who brings with her what I think are 3 African-American children. Well, it turns out these 5, 7, and 9-year-old children are not African-American, they're Sudanese, and they had been slaves.
Ouch.
And I'm physically confronted with the reality of a 9-year-old who tells me the story of how she had been the concubine to her master since she was 4. How they had been physically abused, and I saw the markings, the branding on their faces that were cut into their faces with a machete, and their faces placed against a hot rock to mark who they were, and in a way that only a child can say, and children are the same everywhere in the world. The 7-year-old says to me when I said, well, what is a branding? He looks at me and goes, how that our master can tell the difference from us when we were playing with everybody else, you big idiot. And I'm like, this kid going, how do I deal with this?
Yes. Wow.
That moment was the life-changing moment for me. That moment was what, meeting those children was the moment when I said, yes, this is my purpose in life. Because these 3 children should never have gone through this, and nor should any child ever again. But the reality is, every single person who hears me tell that story, or who hears any kind of story like that, should have the same reaction. Yeah. And this is what grassroots organizations like WTPN, like Building Bridges, what you guys are doing, telling the story, telling the message. Because if
Joseph, let me jump in here, and I really do want you to finish, but I need to give you just a little bit more information that I think will probably stimulate your answer a little bit more. This is what I see, and this is what I posted the other day. I got tired of people talking about how they were pro-life, especially people in America. They are constantly saying, I'm against abortion, I'm pro-life. And they go around wearing that like a badge on their sleeve. I'm pro-life, I'm against abortion. What really, really stands out to me as proving the hypocrisy in that statement are these are the same people who turned a blind eye to African children dying daily due to lack of medication, of mass starvation in parts of the world.
Roger, you're preaching to the choir. I'm going to interrupt you here.
My point, Joseph, is that how can you tell me and go around bragging to everybody because you're against abortion, you're pro-life, when there are people dying across the world by the tens of thousands every single day, and you're ignoring that? You're not pro-life. You're not even close to pro-life. That is hypocrisy.
Oh, look, I'm right there with you, and this is one of the things that I annoy my friends on both the left and the right with this, because the fact of the matter is, you are not pro-life if the only time you're protecting a child is when it's in the womb.
Yes.
That child is just as important the moment it's born, and by the way, for the next 18 years later. Yes. So when we look at Congo and we see one woman raped every 41 seconds, this is a problem. Yes. This is something we need to stand up for. This is something we need to do. And when our president, who introduced the Congo Special Envoy bill, doesn't appoint a special envoy to deal with the Congo, that tells me something. When the SEC right now, the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the United States, guts a bill that would enforce fighting against the use of blood minerals, that's a problem. When Republicans, so this is not just a Republican problem and a pro-life problem, there's a Democratic problem and a human rights problem.
Yes.
That it doesn't matter what your political affiliation, it doesn't matter what your religious identity. The fact is that if you do not stand for those who cannot stand for themselves, all the way across the board, not just in the womb, but in the womb and out, then you are not doing what you are called to do, not just by your faith, but by your simple human dignity.
How can we justify teaching women how to keep from being raped instead of preventing men from raping women? And that is the mindset. The mindset is we will teach a woman how to keep from being raped instead of making sure that men don't rape women. The whole concept is backwards because what you've got is you're treating the issue, not the problem.
Well, but Roger, this is more than just the rape issue. This is also
right. I agree.
We deal with human trafficking, that we deal with prostitution. We blame the woman, and we ignore the man.
Absolutely.
So the question is, looking at it in the human trafficking concept, we fight against human trafficking, but very often police forces around the world punish the women. But the reality is, more often than not, it's not the woman's fault. I mean, 99% of the time, these are women who are abducted, that are sold into sexual slavery, and then treated like they're prostitutes and put in jail. Until we start dealing with the demand, not just the supply, whether it's prostitution, human trafficking, rape, all the rest of this, to be talking about, what the whole Todd Aiken issue, and I tried not to get into this, but the whole Todd Aiken concept in the United States makes me want to beat myself in the head with a shoe. What is wrong with us when we now are defining legitimate versus illegitimate rape? I'm sorry, rape is rape. I don't care what you look at it.
Yeah.
It's rape. Period.
I mean, people, I love American people. I keep saying it all the time. But people in America are lazy. They don't like to read. They don't like to research. They just don't like to learn. It's like, it's shocking to see media can make any negative thing look positive and any positive thing very negative when they use adequate propaganda methods. They have all the means. People have, also in Europe, in some parts, they have all the means to learn something, but they do not. They choose not to. But the society in Europe and America are very different. For example, in Europe, you can teach a society something, they can learn, but they may not want to use it in their practical lives. But American people are not like that. They are very open to changing their minds. They are open-minded. They are very open to loving and feeling compassionate about each other. But they do not want to learn.
Joanna, you hit on something incredibly important that I hadn't thought about before, because one of the things that I used to argue is technology is good for us. With technology, we have more access to information. And with more access to information, there's a greater opportunity for us to learn more, to develop our minds, to expand. But the negative consequence of that, which you point out, is that with the greater access to technology, iPads, iPhones, all of these, Facebook,
Internet,
Twitter,
yes.
Yeah, is also that we can stop thinking.
Yeah.
And we can just accept whatever is put in front of us. And I'm really afraid that that's where we're going in this country, is that we're not thinking, we're accepting.
Yeah, for example, I keep talking about also the Che example, because we see his face on mugs and hoodies and lighters, keychains everywhere, and young people look at him as a freedom fighter, not knowing he's indeed a serial killer. And Che killed hundreds of people personally. He explains how he gains pleasure from watching a bullet go inside the man's right hemisphere of his head and kills him. And he's a classical psychopath. He's just a psychopath. And they think he symbolizes equality. They can... Please go ahead.
I'm laughing while you mention that, because I was talking in my office a few months ago about how all of a sudden Che Guevara is on every T-shirt, and everybody between the age of 18 and 25 thinks Che was this great guy. And no one can put it into context. And what I'm waiting for are the Stalin T-shirts to start coming.
Maybe not so much, Joseph, because I put, and Jaylon will tell you this, I got, after a conversation her and I had, I got a picture of Che, and I put a caption over it, and I published it. And if you've ever been on my wall, you see there's about 7,500 people there, and all of the other, I mean, we have 1,000 forums in WTPN, 1,000 different groups, which encompass at least 20 million people. But I put a post with a picture of Che, and over it I put, what kind of society have we become when the psychopath becomes a hero?
Right.
And I got such a huge positive response to that it actually shocked me. So people are becoming aware of this issue. But for the longest time, it was a blind issue. Che was the fashion. It was like wearing a Pravda shirt. You know, it was the cool thing to do. Well, what you're doing, you might be being cool, but you're perpetuating the thinking and the ranting of a psychopath.
Yeah. And you know, Roger, I'm actually I'm happily shocked that you had a positive response to that.
We did.
It gives me hope for humanity, and I have to be honest, at this moment, I ain't so hopeful for humanity.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at where we're going and what we're doing, and the decisions that we're making, and I'm thinking, wow, really? Is this the best we can do?
Yes.
Is this really like, you know, if evolution is true and this is where we're going, is this really where, you know, the best of the best is going to be? Or have we started to devolve at some point? Where did that point come? You know, we don't care about human rights. We don't care about human dignity. We don't, you know, I look at what happens in Africa. How is the world blind?
They are.
To the deaths of millions of people in Africa year after year after year, and we don't do anything.
Because they are Darwinists, and they think there is evolution. They sincerely believe in it, and they think people living in Africa are lower species, so they don't even think they are human. So
you know
they
what?
don't care.
You took the words right out of my mouth. You know, I'm going to say something, and this is going to get me thrown off your show. I'm never going to be invited back.
Okay.
In the United States, we don't like black people.
I know.
We don't. We just don't. And we don't care about them, which is why 3 million people can die in Sudan and we're not going to do anything. But 50,000 people in Yugoslavia creates a genocide.
I mean, Joseph, if you educate a total society with Darwinism, but you know, this happens everywhere in the world. This happens in Turkey, this happens in Iran, this happens in Saudi Arabia. It's being taught in every school in the world right now, and there's no escape from it. If you keep teaching young students, black people are lower species, and Anglo-Saxons and white people are higher species, and black people do not have a right to live because they're making us late in our evolution. Without them, we will evolve into more developed species. They will hate them, period. There is no outcome.
But to me, it's not even the evolution question. To me, it's the simple equality question. It's, you know, it doesn't matter to me in a certain sense whether or not people believe in evolution or they believe in creation. The argument to me is we're all here right now, and we all have a responsibility to each other because guess what? If it happens to you, it's going to happen to me. And until we start to stand up and recognize that we do have, you know, in a Christian scriptural sense, we are each other's brothers' keepers. Until we recognize that we have a duty and responsibility to one another to provide safety, security, and the simple, basic fundamentals of life, food, shelter, and clothing.
I mean,
it doesn't matter what any of the rest of this is. It just matters that we don't care about one another. And where do we go as a global society if we don't care that people die?
Two of my biggest heroes in existence, and then I'll pass it right back to you, Jaylon, because I know you're itching to say something about that. Two of my biggest heroes, and this might shock a lot of people, are Mandela and King. And if you just listen to the words they say, and what really, really saddens me is that a lot of times somebody has to die before you realize the wisdom in their words.
Yeah.
I see so much going around about Dr. King and what he said and the wisdom that actually came out of that man's mouth. But when you stop and look at the hell he went through for so many years to try and bring an idea forward to the American society, you realize that at that time nobody wanted to listen. And now that we are listening, and now that I'm posting his quotes and other people are posting his quotes, the one thing that shames me so bad, because I'm 58 years old, I remember when all of this was going on. The one thing that really shames me so bad is that we had a man with an extremely good vision. We've had, and the same thing with our great spiritual leader from South Africa. We have people amongst us with so much wisdom, and until they're gone, their word is ignored. And I'll pass it to you, Jaylon.
I want to say, Joseph, you said this is very important and everybody has to understand this. We are all here, and I don't care if there was evolution. This is very true. You know, we are here as a society, as a whole, and we should unite. Separation is much more difficult than being united. But, and there is a but, this is you. And unfortunately, you don't represent a majority. I pray that all people would think like you, but people don't. This is you. People don't think like you. They care if evolution ever happened or it's happening right now. They care. It affects them. It affects them subconsciously. It affects them consciously in everywhere. If there is dialectics in nature or not, it affects them to think if there is dialectics in history or not. It affects the society as a whole. And I wish everyone was like you, but it's not true. You don't represent a majority in the world, and I wish you did. I wish all people were like you, but they're not.
Aren't we trying to change that? And through education, through changing those dialectics, through changing the base, we have to change the way people think, but we have to do it from a very grassroots level. And by that, I don't mean by the people. It's how we teach our children in school. One of the best posts I have ever seen, that I have ever made, was I put a picture up, and it was a picture of several young Muslim boys wearing a scarf across their face and holding machine guns. And the caption I put on it was, if we truly want to stop war, why don't we stop teaching our children to hate? If you start teaching from the time they're old enough to start speaking that there is a difference between Islam and Jewish, a difference between Jewish and Christian, if you start teaching at the age of 4 or 5 years old that you need to hate this person because, if we continue to do that, we in fact perpetuate every single problem because they grow up with that as a normal mindset. And once we've done that, overcoming that issue becomes almost impossible. So what we need to do is change the basic level of education. If you look at children playing on a playground, you could have an African American, you could have an Oriental, you could have an Islamic child, you could have a Christian child. They don't know the difference. They're not aware of the prejudices. They will play together, they will laugh together, they will be the best friends in the world. But as soon as they get old enough to understand, you're black and I'm white, you're brown and I'm black, and that there is a major difference there, and I'm not supposed to like you because, once they reach that stage, that's the stage where hatred starts to grow. Hatred is not anything you're born with. It is something you're taught. So we need to change the way we teach our children to truly change society permanently.
Yeah. But, Roger, you touched on Dr. King and on Mandela. In a certain sense, and again, I don't mean to disagree with you, but I'm going to disagree with you in just a certain sense in this.
Well, I hope you would. That's what a discussion is for.
Sometimes we need the prophet who is the martyr to remind us of what the fight is for.
Yes.
And
agreed.
In a certain sense, Dr. King dying was, rightfully so, the shock of the nation to kick us into a certain...
It was a catalyst.
Exactly. And in that sense, Dr. King's life is fulfilled in his execution, but at the same time, his message will never die.
Agreed.
And what we need to understand is, in a certain sense, more than just we need to teach our children not to hate, we need to teach our children to love.
Absolutely.
So it's more than just, no, don't dislike that child. It's, no, go play with that child. But what we really need to be doing, it becomes a chicken and egg question.
Yes.
If we want to teach our kids not to hate, we have to not hate to teach them not to hate. So
yes.
At what point do we do this? And so what we're ultimately talking about isn't a grassroots issue. It's a fundamentally human issue. What we're talking about is a changing of the human psyche away from selfishness, away from bigotry, away from self-centeredness. Because what is hatred? Hatred is simply selfishness. It's a knowledge, it's a belief that we know better and we are better.
Then you got to do away with materialism as well. Because that's what fuels most of it.
But that's all in that same selfishness issue.
Yep.
As long as we believe that the other is as important as we are, and to me that's the most basic thing. The other is as important as we are.
The value is the same no matter who the individual is.
Exactly. And in that sense, it doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your sexual identity, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter your religion. It's just the other isn't bad, the other is me. Because to them, I'm the other. So
yes.
The other is important. And so we need to be building a conceptualization as a society. And I say this when I say society, I mean a global society, because I think Ceylan is dealing with this in Turkey as well. And you guys are doing a tremendous job in building that concept in Turkey and in the Middle East as you're trying to do here as well. To say that, we are all one family, we're just different members, but that the other isn't bad, it's just
different.
There.
I hate like heck to do this, but I absolutely have to. I knew this was going to happen. We've come to just about the end of our show, and I would so much just like to run on and on. So what I'm going to do is give you an invitation to come back and do a future show with us where we can pick up this conversation where we left off. Because what we've done here is we've put forth a lot of ideas, and we haven't really had a chance yet to discuss a lot of solutions. So this is a perfect stopping point if we had a perfect stopping point. And I would like very much, first I'll ask you, Ceylan, if there's anything else you'd like to say to our guest.
I only want to say thank you.
That's okay. And I would also like to say thank you. I knew this would be a very engrossing conversation. I knew it would be entertaining. And I knew the ideas would flow in all directions. So, Joseph, thanks again. This is the second time we've gotten to enjoy your wisdom and your intellect and your entertainment quotient. So we look forward to having you back again. And are there any parting shots? Do you have a website that people can go to take a look at some of the things that you're involved in? Is there any way that we can get people more interested in your projects?
Absolutely, and I appreciate that opportunity. Our website is www.religionandpolicy.org, and the "and" is written out. And Jaylon and Roger, I'm very, very grateful to spend this time with you. And I'm shocked, actually, that you invited me to come back again, because I thought I might have disinvited myself. But I really have enjoyed the opportunity to get to work with the two of you, and look forward to doing much more in the future.
Just stick around for a second, if you would, please. And I would like to tell everybody in the audience that this is the end of another Building Bridges show. And as usual, our guests never cease to surprise us. This has been a great show, and we will talk to you again next week.
I can be sure of this. Memories are fading fast. A fragile heart of glass that shattered once before. The walls start to break and crack, but nothing is built to last. His patience are running thin, but I know I can't give up. If we make the choice to walk out the door and let all we have become nothing more, can we look at ourselves and resist this moment in time together? It's not impossible that we could end this war. Just let your heart explode. Not too late for a miracle. It's not impossible. I know we can resist so many shots that missed. My heart can't take a hit, 'cause I know I can't let go. If we make a choice to walk out the door and let all we have become nothing more, can we look at ourselves and resist this moment in time together? It's not impossible that we could end this war. Just let your heart explode. Not too late for a miracle. Oh, no more fighting, no more crying, no more hurting, no deserting, no more lying, no more sighing. I'm still trying, arms wide open in this world, in this world, in this world, in this world. It's not impossible that